Hello everyone. So a few weeks ago I posted a video to my channel. It was a 3D model of the old canal basins in Edinburgh that no longer exist now, with a fly-through of the basins so that you could see what they might have looked like. And it seemed to go down well. People seemed to like it. Quite a few people asked me how it was made, so I thought I'd do a quick video sort of showing behind the scenes, showing how it's constructed and the software I used and stuff, in case people are interested to see that. So let's get started. To begin with, I should say that I'm neither a professional 3D artist nor a professional historian, so this was just the way I chose to do it. There are certainly various different ways you could make something like this, and I'm not claiming my way was the only way or the best way, but this was the way I chose to do it. So another thing is all of the software I used to make this is actually freely available. None of it's expensive or needs a subscription or anything like that, and it runs on all common platforms. I actually started making this on Linux. I upgraded my computer and switched to Windows about halfway through. The software functions basically the same on both, so there was no problem with that. Sorry, I'm just going to turn my phone down because it's getting notifications coming through. And it also all runs on Mac as well, so if you're interested in getting into stuff like this, it's quite an accessible thing to get into. You can just download the software and away you go, really. It can be quite challenging to learn to use, but there's a lot of good material out there to help. I especially recommend looking up tutorials on YouTube. That's how I learned a lot of this stuff. And if you want something more in depth, you can buy much longer, more involved courses on this software and platforms like Udemy, and I've done a few of those as well now, and they can be pretty good. So anyway, so where do you start with something like this? It could be quite a daunting project, really. So I started by gathering as much reference material as I could. So this is the folder in my Dropbox which contains all of my reference material. Basically it's mostly photos of the old basins as they were. This is all the photos I could find. Most of them I found various places online, so I just saved them in here so I could refer to them. I've got some that were captured from Google Street View to show me what the current streets in the area look like and show the details of some of the buildings that still exist. I've also got reference pictures of things like cranes, because I knew there were old cranes around the basins, but I couldn't find any good pictures of those specific ones, so these are just similar looking cranes that I found online. And in this folder I've got, I'll show it a bit larger. These are photos I found that have, typical Union Canal barges in them, so that I could model the right kind of boat for the basins. But possibly the most important thing was this map. This is taken from the National Library of Scotland's map site. They have some great old maps on there, and a lot of them are under quite a liberal license where you can use them for things, whatever you want to, really. So that's really good. I've taken, because the basins was sort of divided between multiple sheets, I've sort of pieced them together in this image, and you'll see in a bit how I used this. This was probably the most important piece of reference material I had. A couple of other things I should mention. Firstly, the model I made, it was really more intended to give an impression of what the basins might have been like. It wasn't a strict snapshot in time, if that makes sense. Like the photos I have of the old basins, they come from various different time periods, so some of them have one buildings there, but another building that you see in other photos isn't, for example. I didn't attempt to say, okay, this is exactly how the basins would have looked in 1900. I think that would have been too difficult to do, because I mean, most of the photos didn't even have a date on them for a start, so it's just intended to kind of give the right impression. Another thing is, some of the old maps, you'll see there was actually a third basin that no longer exists now. It sort of branched off the canal here before Fountain Bridge, and there was a basin round about here called the Lochrin Basin. I would have liked to include that in the model as well, but I wasn't able to, because I've never actually found any pictures of this one. It closed before the others, I think, hence why it's not on this map, but Port Hamilton and Port Hopetoun are. So I couldn't find a single reference image, so if I had, tried to model it, it would have been pure guesswork, so I didn't bother in the end. It's also complicated by the fact that the current terminus of the canal at Edinburgh Quay is also known as the Lochrin Basin, so if you try and search for pictures of Lochrin Basin, you just get loads of the present terminus, and it'd be very hard to find the ones of the old Lochrin Basin, even if they were out there. So I decided to just go with Port Hamilton and Port Hopetoun. So this was the reference material. Let's now see how I started to make use of this and put it together. So the first of the tools that I used was this wonderful piece of software called Blender. Blender is a fully featured piece of 3D software. It can do modelling, animation, rendering, all kinds of things. You can make entire animated films within Blender. It can pretty much do everything you might need it to do. It's quite amazing that something like this is available for free, really. So the first thing I did was to import the map that I've just showed you as a background image in Blender, and then use that to sort of trace over and model the basic shape of the canal. That was what I started with. So in here you can see like the canal banks, you can see the basins, you can see the flat ground in between them. And if I turn on the materials, you can see that I basically just used a cobbled material for all of the surrounding areas, and a sort of stone blocks material for the edges of the canal. It's quite simplistic. I should say almost all the textures I used in this project came from a great site called textures.com, where you can download all kinds of 3D textures for free, and you're allowed to use them for most purposes as long as you don't start up a competing texture site with them, basically. So using them for models or in games or whatever, that's fine. So I downloaded plenty of those and used those for this model. Another thing I should say is I actually also I made it so that the model was actually to scale, so I scaled it so that one Blender unit corresponds to 1 meter in the real world, or at least as closely as I could. You don't really have to do that. It doesn't actually matter really what scale the 3D model's at, as long as it's consistent with itself, but I just find it a bit easier if you're doing something like you want to create a boat, and you know roughly how many meters long the boat should be. That gives you a good starting point for creating the model. But it wasn't just the base that I created in Blender. I also, everything you see in the basins model was actually modelled in Blender, with 2 small exceptions. The curbstones you see along the edge of the roads, and also the piles of coal you see around Port Hamilton, those weren't modelled in Blender. I downloaded those from an amazing site called Quixel Megascans, and you can get access to that if you use Unreal Engine, which I'll be talking about later. If you use Unreal Engine, you can use all of these the models on there for free in your projects, so that's really good. I actually tried to model the coal myself, but I just couldn't get it to look right. So in the end I just gave up and used a pile of stones from the Megascan site and changed the colour to make it black so it looked like coal. And it doesn't look brilliant, but it was better than anything I could do manually. So like I said, just about everything you see in the basins model is modelled in Blender. So what I thought I would do is to just show very quickly the process of creating, say, a little house in Blender, just to give you an idea of how it works. So I'm starting with this cube. I move the cube up so that it's on the ground plane, so that it would appear on the ground. I'll make the roof a little bit higher. I'll scale it out so that it's a bit bigger in the X dimension and in the Y dimension. Actually, that's a little bit too big. I think that would look... What did I do? That wasn't what I meant to do. You can always do undo and stuff in Blender, so that's quite good. So I've got the house about the size I want it. So the next thing I'm going to do is what's called an extrusion. Scale in Y to make a little overhang, and then look at it from the end, extrude again, in Z and make it up there. And then if I scale this in Y, scale it almost down to nothing, then I've got the roof. So that's the basic shape of the house. Now we would like this to have some kind of material to it, so let's have brick walls and slate roofs. Be a traditional little house. So I can open textures here. I'm just looking for the right one. So this is I can't find my... Here we go. I think this is the one. So bricks, that obviously isn't looking quite right, so the bricks aren't mapped to the building in the right way, so we can fix that by doing a cube projection and then scaling the projected faces so that it looks about right. That's looking better now, except for the fact that the roof is also showing up as brick, which obviously we don't want. So let's create a new material and call it slate. Then we'll assign that material to the roof planes. Then we'll open image texture. So we have roof slates here. We'll open that, and this looks like it's already more or less projected correctly, so I'll just make some adjustments to this. So now I've got the roof slates and the sort of metal along the top, so that looks okay. So now we've got a very simple looking little building. Obviously you'd normally want to do a lot more with this, like you'd want to make doors, windows, chimneys, other sort of adornments, but I don't want to bore you too much with making a Blender video. There's plenty of Blender videos on YouTube already. So I'm going to call this little house.blend, and in a bit I'll show you how you import this into Unreal Engine. So I need to export it in the FBX or film box format so Unreal Engine can read it. So now that's been a little look at Blender, so I'm now going to move on to the other major piece of software that I used for this, which is Unreal Engine 4. And Unreal Engine 4 is actually a game engine, but you can also use it for things like this, for architectural modelling, or for almost anything that involves a 3D world of some kind, really. So I guess one obvious question is, why didn't I just do the whole thing in Blender? Because Blender is more than capable of doing it. Like I said before, Blender can be used to make entire animated films. So, I mean, there's a few reasons, really. I guess for a lot of things, like for making things like smoke effects, the atmospheric fog effects and things like that. Unreal Engine's just a bit nicer to work with. I find it a bit friendlier for sort of combining lots of models together into a 3D world, and because it's designed for games, it runs in real time. It's a bit faster than Blender for various operations. It can render things a lot faster than Blender, so that was kind of why I ended up using Unreal Engine for this model. So I'll show you around a bit. You can obviously see the basins model here. I can move around with the mouse and you can turn around. You can see the big empty space if you look off into the distance, a bit you never see on the video. So I like to arrange everything into a nice neat hierarchy. So everything in the scene is an actor. So this boat is an actor. The base that I showed you in Blender is an actor. The buildings are all actors. So all of the actors are in this, you can see them in this panel here, sort of hierarchy of them. I put all of the boats and their ropes in one folder, all of the bridges in one folder, all the buildings in a hierarchy of folders and things like that. And then I've put all of the effects, such as the fog, the smoke from the chimneys, in a folder. You can see how it looks if I turn the fog off. I think you'll agree it's a lot nicer with the fog on. I wanted it to look sort of smoggy and industrial because of the subject matter and the time period it's supposed to be representing. So I like to keep everything all organised in a nice neat hierarchy. So I actually made this from the Unreal Engine first person shooter template. So to begin with, you could actually wander around the basins and shoot things, which was kind of fun but also a bit pointless. I think that's probably not the best way to do it. There are other templates that you can use that are probably more well suited to this, but I didn't have any experience of them, so I just started from what I knew. I modified it until it did what I wanted. So the main modification is, if you see this white ball here and this line, if we follow the white line, you see this is a curve object, and this is the path that the camera takes through the model in the video. So I created this curve, and then I created some blueprint code, which is Unreal's sort of visual scripting system, which is very cool and can do lots of stuff. So this blueprint code in here makes the camera follow the curve when you start playing. So if I start playing, you can see it doing that. It's now following the curve just like in the video. So to render out the video, I just played it and I captured the video output using a program called OBS Studio, which is also what I'm using to record myself and my screen right now. That seemed to be the only sort of easy way to do it. I don't know whether there's a better way, but that was the way I ended up using anyway. So I can show you now how I can place that little building I made in Blender. So I've got the map reference also in Unreal. If I unhide it here, if I go into top-down view, you can see the model with the maps that are overlaid on top of it semi-transparently. So say we wanted to add this little house here, say where that little building on the map is. Well, first we need to import the house itself. So we go in here and go into import asset, and I'm in the wrong folder again. Here we go. So if I go into the right one, you go into little house, and I think we could leave these to the defaults here and import this. Never mind those errors, they don't really matter too much. And now if we look in here, we need to assign the materials in here as well. So we got, I think we want red brick. There's red brick for the walls and slates for the roof. So there we go, that looks like what we had in Blender now, except it's rendering the materials properly, so it looks a bit nicer really. So I can save that and close, and now I can drag this out into the world. So say we want to put it here, like I said, we can drop it there. It should drop onto ground level by default. We can rotate it and move it into position. And then we can go back to a 3D view, and sure enough, there it is. I'm going to disable the map reference. So there it is in our world. So that's basically how I placed stuff from Unreal Engine. So what else is there to show you in Unreal Engine? Well, these are all the meshes. There's all the buildings there, all of the bridges here. The bridges were quite fun to do, so I can open Leamington Lift Bridge and have a look at that, for example. There's also the other meshes, things like the crane, the bollards, the big tall chimney. Some things you probably never even really noticed, like this gate, a telegraph pole, lamp post, all that kind of thing. You can see the materials in here. This is all the materials that are assigned to everything in the world there. So it's various different materials and various different textures. Each material has generally 3 textures. There's one that sort of, it actually looks like the material, it's kind of the colour, but there's also a roughness texture to tell the renderer how smooth the material should be. So for example, the roof slates should be a lot smoother than the brick, and there's also what's called a normal texture, and this really handles like little bumps in the surface of the material, for example. There's a couple of special materials as well. There's water, and there's the glass for the windows, and there's also materials for the smoke particles, and then there's a particle system for the smoke. You can kind of edit it here. You can you create different particle emitters. You can make it look the way you want it to, decide how many particles get spawned and what happens to them after they get spawned, and so on. So it was quite fun to do. If you look at the world in Unreal Engine, you'll see that the buildings that are more distinctive and closer to the canal, like this one with the brick tower, or there's also this impressive one with the turrets on Fountain Bridge, that's still there now, and the front of the dance hall building, you never actually get to see the front of it in the video, so maybe it was a bit of a waste of time to model it. But ones like that I modelled in quite a lot of detail, trying to get them to look as realistic as possible. Whereas the ones further in the background are a little bit plainer, and a lot of them are just duplicates of other buildings. Like there's a handful of tenement buildings that I created. They're just kind of duplicated over and over. It doesn't really matter too much because you sort of get away with it because they're far enough in the background and because of all the smog and smoke and everything in the atmosphere. So it generally looks okay. They're just really there to fill gaps in the background. You don't want there to be obvious gaps that you can see in the background, because it kind of ruins the illusion of being in a built-up city if you can see all the way out to the horizon. So yeah, I don't think there's much more to say really. There was also, of course, real life footage and voiceover as well as the 3D model, but those aren't so interesting, I guess. I just went out to film them and then edited it all in a video editing program called Lightworks. It's also freely available. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this little tour around the 3D basins model, and hopefully I'll be back at some point with another 3D model to show you. I'd like to do something similar again, just a case of when I get the time and the inspiration really. But anyway, thanks for watching, and bye for now.